Around 6 p.m. on Wednesday, Patrick Tunn arrived home after working an extra hour and a half to finish a wiring job assigned by his supervisor, way behind schedule earlier that day. His dedication allowed him to complete the task nearly half a day ahead of time, despite working tirelessly all day, leaving his muscles sore. His wife, Glenda, had left that morning for a 3-day seminar in Columbus, which allowed him to focus on his work. Initially, he had planned to accompany her, and they had tickets reserved for a spring break cruise, prominently displayed in their cabinet. Surprised by the lack of a message confirming her safe arrival, Patrick decided to call Glenda. He dialed her cell phone from the house phone, and she answered after just 2 rings, expressing joy at his call and mentioning she had been about to call him. Patrick wasn't surprised, as his home phone showed her number. "You know I've always had the ability to read your mind, darling. So, I guess you arrived safely. How was the traffic? I hope your car is still intact," he joked, anticipating her defense of her driving skills and imagining her irritated face, perhaps sticking out her tongue if they were face to face. The possibility of snow in early January worried him a little. He'd be concerned if she drove, relieved if she flew. She quickly responded with a laugh, assuring him everything was fine. Traffic was light and she easily found the Sharon Hotel, thanks to the map he printed for her. "You know I'd do anything for you, sweetheart." "Nothing's too good for me," Glenda said. Patrick had asked for the day off to accompany her, but she quickly refused. No, you're not coming," she said firmly, then explained her desire to wait until spring break for a trip together. "Yes, I know. I was just kidding," Patrick replied, though her firm refusal bothered him. "I'll be a good boy and stay home," he added, laughing, not wanting to let her win so easily. He noticed the relief in her voice when she said, "I'm glad to hear it, Patrick. These will be boring days with seminars lined up. We wouldn't have had time together anyway. Do you think I'm reading your mind, Glenda? Do you need to talk?" Patrick asked. "Oh, you reminded me. I can't find my travel bag with the sewing kit and other things. Maybe it's in the bedroom or the car trunk." "Sure, darling, hold on a second. I'll go look," he said, quickly grabbing the cordless phone and heading upstairs. He found the bag on the dresser. "I found it," he said into the phone. "Watch out for the buttons and the lint," she sighed in relief, mentioning a nearby store for replacements. "I've got to go, registration is open. It's a busy week ahead with presentations and dinners, but we'll have Saturday afternoon together. Don't worry, darling, I worked extra today. I should finish Thursday and Friday. Call me if you can, and I'll do the same if anything comes up. See you Saturday for dinner." After exchanging farewells, Patrick walked downstairs, reflecting on Glenda's recent behavior. Despite her firm rejection of his joke about joining her on the trip, she had been acting strange for months. Hungry and distracted, he ordered pizza. With nearly 40 minutes until delivery, he changed out of his work uniform and relaxed with a beer at the kitchen table. He didn't worry about weight gain thanks to his active job, and since Glenda didn't like pizza, he'd eat it himself, saving the leftovers for lunch the next day at work. An hour passed as he watched the news, but he couldn't stop thinking about Glenda and her recent changes. It bothered him that she had been so opposed to him accompanying her on the trip. Glenda, 35 years old, tall and slender with long dark hair and equally dark eyes, worked as a sociology professor. She took pride in her success as a junior faculty member, mentioning she had more classes than others but had a teaching assistant to help with grading and advising. When the fall semester began, she spoke about her teaching assistant, Anthony, a soon-to-graduate student who took on some of her responsibilities. His name came up occasionally, but not recently. In mid-November, she discussed upcoming seminars during the New Year break, initially agreeing that he could accompany her. However, 2 weeks later, she changed her mind, preferring a trip together during spring break. Reluctantly, Patrick accepted her decision during Christmas. The seminars weren't a topic since they enjoyed the holidays with family and friends. Glenda received envelopes with training materials, quickly sending in her registration, eager to travel. She began packing days before New Year's Eve, her organized nature shining through. Returning to the bedroom after 8 p.m. Patrick planned to resume reading a book left on the nightstand. Seeing Glenda's bag, he moved it to its usual place in the closet, noticing it was resting on top of her journal. Married for 8 years, Patrick had rarely seen her journal, which she kept hidden. Once, he jokingly asked to read it, but she firmly refused, considering it personal and private. They never discussed it again, and in their 8 years together, he had only glimpsed it a couple of times before she quickly put it away. Patrick suspected Glenda wrote in her journal either at her university office or possibly at home while he was at work. Their schedules didn't align. She was usually home when he left and returned after he finished. When he put the bag back in the closet, he picked up the journal for the first time in a long while. The 6x8-inch book, about an inch thick, was bound in red leather with a brass clasp and lock. Patrick realized the journal might contain clues about Glenda's recent behavior. Instead of returning it to the dresser, he took it to the more brightly lit kitchen to examine it closely. He noticed that only a third of the pages showed signs of use, suggesting it couldn't be her only journal for 8 years of entries. There must be older volumes elsewhere. After a brief reflection, Patrick realized that Glenda's closet was the likely place for her earlier journals. Each had their own closet, and he had never explored hers. He went upstairs and searched for 5 minutes before finding a shoebox on the top shelf containing a stack of red leather journals. He returned to the kitchen with his discovery. Notably, each journal had a small white label on the spine and was numbered from 1 to 6, while the current one wasn't numbered. On the back cover of each, the name Cam's was engraved, a local specialty shop. The 7 locks were identical, with no distinguishing marks. Patrick wondered if they all used the same key. Curious, he took out the phone book and quickly found the number for K Specialties. As it approached 8:35 p.m., he wondered if they were open, knowing many downtown stores stayed open late on Wednesdays. After 2 rings, a young woman answered, "K Specialties, how can I help you?" Her tone sounded genuine. Patrick asked about red leather journals, about 6 by 8 inches, as a gift. "I think I know which book you're referring to, let me check," she said, pausing for about 3 minutes. When she returned, she confirmed they had 2 in stock and assured him the store was open until 10 p.m. Patrick rushed to the store, hoping to get a journal and possibly the key to unlock them. The odds were slim, but Patrick knew that trying to force the lock would likely damage them and earn Glenda's lasting reproach. In less than half an hour, he was on his way home with a red leather journal and a key in his bag. Despite its price of $60, he saw it as a small price to pay to uncover his wife's concerns. He considered giving the new journal as her birthday gift, imagining she might be hiding an illness, as she had done once before with an abnormal result from a penile test. He also speculated about conflicts at her workplace, knowing that Glenda liked to handle such matters on her own. Another possibility lingered in his mind, one he struggled to push away, the thought that Glenda might be having an affair. Reluctant to entertain such ideas, he focused on other potential explanations. Despite their physical differences, he was shorter, with blonde hair and blue eyes, and she was tall and slender. They had known each other since high school, even dating briefly after graduation. Their paths diverged, with Patrick becoming an apprentice electrician and Glenda pursuing higher education. They reconnected at university and quickly married after her graduation. With Patrick established as a master electrician and their house purchased, they planned to buy a bigger one and had discussed starting a family, deciding that Glenda would stop taking birth control at the end of the school year. Back at home, Patrick wasn't entirely sure if the key to the new journal would fit. He found it in a small envelope inside the journal box, and it seemed too small. He realized he should have asked the shop assistant about the key's compatibility. If it didn't fit, he would abandon the attempt rather than search for Glenda's hidden keys. 5 minutes later, he was seated at the kitchen table with a stack of journals, contemplating whether to use the key on Glenda's latest journal. Concerns about her health and persistent curiosity pushed him to continue. He hesitated, fearing he was betraying her trust, but finally decided to unlock it. The key fit perfectly. As he flipped through the pages, he found Glenda's recent entries, dated the previous day and filling most of the page. He quickly read the neat handwriting, and his expression faded as tears filled his eyes. He moved to the kitchen counter, accidentally squeezing his soda can, causing it to spill over his arm. Eventually noticing the mess, he cleaned up and moved to the living room, placing the journals on the side table. He turned on the lamp and settled into his chair with the 7th journal, anxious to uncover the truth behind his shattered perception of his wife and their life together. Instead of reading in reverse, he opted for chronological order, hoping for answers. He was tempted to confront her at the hotel but dismissed the idea, fearing a lost battle or an emotional crisis. The first page, dated early June, marked the beginning of Patrick's search for clues in Glenda's journal. Despite finding satisfaction in her life, career, and marriage, none of the summer entries shed light on the shocking revelation from the final page. However, in early September, he found a crucial entry hinting at the answers he sought. On September 8, Glenda wrote about meeting her new teaching assistant, Anthony Romano, describing him as a bit taller, with dark hair, dark eyes, and a short beard. She noted his impressive qualifications. Patrick searched the journal for more mentions of Anthony but found nothing in the subsequent entries. Glenda seemed content but slightly anxious about managing a large class of over 100 students. On September 15, Glenda wrote about Anthony assisting in her large class, answering students' questions while she prepared lecture materials. She observed that her female students seemed to like him, comparing him to Leonardo DiCaprio. As Patrick read further, mentions of Anthony Romano became more frequent, prompting him to examine the passages more closely. On September 20, Glenda noted that classes were proceeding normally, with some students dropping out due to difficulty. She observed Anthony watching her during lectures from the front row and planned to assign him more work. On September 24, Glenda mentioned working on a reading assignment when Anthony visited her office, efficiently helping her with the task. She also expressed her intention to discuss future plans about having children with Patrick, marking the first mention of this topic. By September 30, Glenda noted Anthony's continued attention during lectures, despite her disapproving looks. Female students approached him with questions, showing more interest in him than in her. Despite this, Glenda felt pleased with her students' progress and the pressure she faced as a tenured professor. While the subsequent entries omitted mentions of Anthony, Glenda remained optimistic about her classes and expressed her desire to discuss family plans with Patrick after her first year as a tenured professor, planning to start trying for a baby at the end of the school year. On October 8, Glenda excitedly shared her decision with Anthony to start a family with Patrick after the spring semester. His supportive reaction led to an unexpected hug in her office, though she gently reminded him of their surroundings. On October 10, Glenda felt uncomfortable when Anthony locked the door to her office during a visit. However, he complied when she asked him to unlock it. His brief stay left her questioning his intentions. On October 11, Anthony returned to assist Glenda, expressing a preference for mature women and apologizing for locking the door the previous day. Although happily married, Glenda found his attention flattering, entertaining thoughts about his interest in her over the younger women at the university. On October 13, Glenda anticipated Anthony's visit to her office but felt disappointed when he didn't show up, wanting to discuss more about his interest in mature women. On October 15, despite expecting Anthony to stay after students left her office, he left before she could engage him in further conversation. On October 16, Glenda finally spoke with Anthony, who expressed his preference for mature women based on past experiences. She failed to assert her boundaries, and not condemning his behavior now left her troubled by the encounter. Patrick found this entry disturbing, realizing that Glenda hadn't reacted as he had expected. He left the journal open and went to get a fresh can of soda before returning to read more about the situation with Anthony. On October 20th, just before leaving work, Anthony unexpectedly entered Glenda's office, ignoring her request to leave the door open. He confessed that he had been thinking about her constantly and asked for a longer kiss, claiming it was for his birthday. Feeling uncomfortable, Glenda agreed to get rid of him. Later, she realized his birthday was in July, feeling deceived but laughing at the thought. She grew concerned about his intentions and resolved to be cautious around him. In the next entry, Anthony was absent, while Glenda focused on grading exams and essays. Patrick found it strange that Anthony wasn't mentioned, but the journal offered no explanation. On October 30th, Glenda wrote, "Today something happened that's hard for me to put into words. Anthony came into my office, closing the door behind him, and pulled me toward him before I had a chance to protest. I felt ashamed for not stopping him sooner. When I finally pushed him away, he insisted I had enjoyed it. I asked him to leave, but he just smiled and said he'd see me tomorrow. I'm struggling to manage the situation with Anthony. I feel trapped, and I don't know if I can trust Patrick. Worse, I can't stop thinking about Anthony." Patrick, reading the entry repeatedly, was filled with a rage he didn't know he had. On November 2nd, I finally stopped worrying that Patrick might notice something unusual. The first night was difficult, but he didn't suspect anything. Despite my anxiety, he still wanted to be with me, and I realized how easy it is to keep secrets from him. November 6th, days have passed since I was alone with Anthony. Even when he's in class, he keeps staring at me, making me uncomfortable. I wonder how he will react if he comes back to my office. November 8th, Anthony visited my office today, but there were other people present. He kissed me quickly before leaving, which made me uncomfortable. Despite this, I'm considering attending a series of seminars in Columbus after the new year. November 9th, yesterday was another difficult day. Anthony's behavior continues to worry me, and I'm starting to wonder how everything will unfold if I don't address it soon. Despite my efforts to focus on work, Anthony managed to sneak into my office unnoticed. When he tried to kiss me, I hesitated before giving in for a brief moment. Regaining control, I pushed him away and retreated to the bathroom, overwhelmed by guilt and fear of Patrick's reaction if he ever found out. Anthony left without apologizing, expressing his desire to meet again. Although I was upset, I composed myself before Patrick came home, hiding my distress as we talked through the night. Patrick, boiling with rage, reread the entry of that day several times, focusing on Anthony in the incident. Despite this, he noticed a significant lack of mentions of Anthony or their relationship in Glenda's diary over the following week, which gave him some relief. November 17th, I'm struggling with a confusing situation. Anthony's influence over me is stronger than I anticipated. I can't figure out if it's his behavior or my own vulnerability, but I feel powerless around him. This afternoon, I confronted him about our previous encounter, emphasizing how inappropriate our relationship is, given my marriage and professional position. Despite my firmness, he showed unsettling behavior, suggesting I close the office door and join him on the sofa. I can't explain why I agreed. We've crossed a dangerous line, and I'm torn between wanting to fire him and justifying our actions. I can never confess this to Patrick, and I feel relieved that our indiscretions remain hidden, protected by the privacy of my office. I hope I can regain my composure before returning home. Patrick, disturbed by the escalating situation, decided to carefully read through Glenda's journals to better understand. He reviewed 2 pages once more, then looked up and realized it was already 2 a.m. Despite knowing many pages remained, he couldn't put the book down. He left a message at work, stating that he would not be available the next day due to personal matters. His life had changed irrevocably, leaving behind love and aspirations, replaced by a deep emptiness and growing anger. After finishing his last drink in the bathroom, he returned to his journal in the living room. Affected by the caffeine, his mind raced, grappling with the weight of what he had read. Checking his watch, he marveled at how only 8 hours ago, he had spoken to Glenda without any suspicions arising. November 22nd, Anthony stopped by the office today, but I kept my distance, maintaining the desk between us. His behavior was appropriate. He didn't try to invade my space or close the door. My guilt prevented any further involvement with him. I felt like he recognized my determination to keep boundaries, hoping I can maintain them in the coming days. Glenda's mood was optimistic as the end of the semester approached. November 23rd, I told Patrick about the seminars, and he supported me, even offering to accompany me. I'll consider his proposal. It seemed like our dynamic had changed significantly since November 23rd and continued until mid-December. November 25th, Anthony visited the office, expressing his desire to visit my home. I firmly rejected the idea, emphatically stating it wasn't an option. He inquired about Patrick's whereabouts, suggesting a visit to his residence. Again, I rejected the idea, reiterating my stance. Despite his persistence, his behavior remained relatively typical, showing interest in the seminars even though they were for staff only. November 30th, yesterday weighed heavily on me, a day I struggled to remember. I feel completely lost. Sleep eludes me, and Patrick noticed my distress. I wish I could confide in him, but the words escape me. Anthony haunts my dreams, even though I have no affection for him. I am tormented by memories of our encounters, questioning my inability to resist. I stood frozen as he closed the door, unable to protest as my mind screamed for me to stop him. After he left, tears ran down my face as I dressed, consumed by regret. I spent the day locked in my office, wrestling with my thoughts, considering therapy despite my obvious remorse. Patrick could not understand Glenda's actions, which deviated from her usual character. As he delved deeper into her diary, his mood darkened, unsettling those who knew him well. December 3rd, Anthony intercepted me in the hallway this morning, suggesting he accompany me to the January seminars, even offering to cover his expenses. Although I rejected his advances, the suggestion lingered in my mind, making me question my own weakness. Patrick, boiling with rage, paused to calm himself, resisting the temptation to drink, opting for clarity instead. Although he was certain of his next steps, he knew he needed a solid plan. Returning to the living room, he resumed reading Glenda's diary. December 7th, Anthony briefly visited my office today to say goodbye before leaving for his Christmas trip home after his exam tomorrow. He asked about returning early for the seminar, suggesting it could be a distraction. I postponed my decision, telling him to call in a few days. December 8th, today, I tricked Patrick into staying home while I attended a seminar, using a cruise as a distraction. Despite his reluctance, he finally agreed. I feel guilty for deceiving him, even though I haven't decided to meet Anthony. I'm considering reflecting on our previous encounters in my office. Despite being content with Patrick, I inexplicably entertain thoughts about Anthony, valuing his experience. I await his call, wondering if he'll persist or give up. December 12th, Anthony called, reiterating his desire to join me in Columbus. He proposed booking adjoining rooms, suggesting I introduce him as my brother. He plans to confirm tomorrow and cover the cost of the room. Now I face the decision of consciously betraying Patrick. December 14th, Anthony called again today, excited about our upcoming stay at the Sheraton. Reluctantly, I made the reservation, feeling guilty. By the time the spring semester ends, he will no longer be a teaching assistant. I hope I can resist further temptations. Anthony has a certain charm that intrigues me, unlike anyone else. I fear that if Patrick finds out, it will devastate him. On December 28th, Anthony called me at home using a code name, in case Patrick answered. He confirmed our plans for New Year's Eve, and I reluctantly agreed, though deep down, I also felt excited. I hope this meeting will finally put an end to our affair. Patrick had to work, giving me the opportunity to finalize the trip. Although I had never spent consecutive nights with another man before marrying Patrick, I decided to go ahead with Anthony's proposal, hoping it would stir my emotions. Patrick looked at the time. It was almost 2 a.m. He was close to finishing Glenda's diaries but was determined to read them all. Even though he knew she hadn't physically cheated, he needed certainty. With tasks ahead, he left the last page unread, opting for a cup of coffee. He could rest later. January 3rd, tomorrow is the big day. I'm leaving for 3 days of seminars and nights with Anthony. I'll pick him up before leaving town and drop him off afterward. Thankfully, Patrick didn't insist on coming with me. I've got a map to make sure I find the way. I discovered a Victoria's Secret nearby and planned to buy outfits to wear with Anthony. I feel uneasy about it, but I plan to wash them before seeing Patrick. I forgot to remind Anthony about contraception, but we can stop by the pharmacy before checking in. Surprisingly, I'm excited, though I worry Anthony might expect new things. I'll save any new experiences for our cruise, framing it as an adventure. I've started packing, hoping Patrick doesn't suspect anything, reading my thoughts. I wonder if I'll be able to go through with it. What happened in my office was spontaneous, but this trip will be planned. I could back out and cover Anthony's expenses, but I already feel excited just thinking about it. Patrick finished Glenda's 7th journal, contemplating everything he had read over the past 9 hours. He started formulating a plan for the next 3 days, convinced that his marriage was over. Even if Glenda backed out of her arrangement with Anthony, the trust was broken. Forgiveness seemed unreachable, and his love for her was fading, while his animosity toward Anthony was growing. Before noon, he dialed a number on his computer screen for investigations. "How can I help you?" The professional tone of the woman who answered reassured him. They handled divorce cases. Patrick asked, unsure of the exact term, but assuming it included his needs. "Does that mean investigating unfaithful spouses?" "Yes, it does." "Would you like to speak with an investigator?" Her response reassured him. "Yes, please, I'm interested in your services," Patrick said. After a brief wait, a male voice answered the line. "This is John Parole. How can I assist you?" Patrick wasted no time explaining his situation. "I suspect my wife is having an affair with a man at the Sheraton Hotel near the airport. Can you provide photographic evidence and give me a quote?" Patrick wasn't sure how to articulate his request precisely. "The Sheraton. We can handle that. Is this happening currently? What's the time frame?" Patrick settled in and explained, "My wife is there until Saturday morning. She's in room 412, and the man with her is in 414, adjoining rooms. They stayed there last night too, but I only decided to take action this morning. She's attending seminars, and he's accompanying her." Patrick wondered if the investigator would catch the subtle irony and laughed. "I understand. Now, I need more details about your surveillance preferences. First, can you provide their names and descriptions?" Patrick described his wife and offered to send a photo if necessary. He had found the firm online but preferred a direct conversation. He also provided Anthony's full name and a vague description from his wife's diary. "It's simple, Mr. Dunn. We can install cameras in their rooms this afternoon and leave them there until after the weekend. Installation is quick, and we have access to the rooms for a flat fee per entry. If you only need photographic evidence and not continuous monitoring, the cost is a fixed fee of $800. Wouldn't it be cheaper to use just one camera? I only need confirmation that they were together. I'd prefer to verify tonight and receive the photos by tomorrow afternoon. We'll need cameras in both rooms since we're not sure which they'll use. Our fee covers quality equipment and access charges, including hiring a maintenance worker for 2 entries, installation and removal, adding $100. Excuse me, I'm new to this. I'll pay in advance with a credit card on your website. Great. Complete the form and mention case number 1372. Once paid, we'll install the cameras and send you a DVD with the footage. Please provide your name and address for delivery. Patrick found the process straightforward, but receiving the DVD by mail was practical. He could hold on to the DVD until he was ready to confront her. Now, I only need photos showing they were together, nothing explicit, just evidence of the affair. Understood, Mr. Dunn. We'll capture stills from the video feed. Patrick provided his phone number and paid with a credit card during the call. The investigator confirmed the payment and began the camera installation. With everything arranged, Patrick finally gave in to the need for sleep. After a nap and a quick meal, he resumed reading Glenda's diaries, speeding through without rereading or overthinking. By the time he finished the first volume, Glenda called just before 10 p.m. The conversation was surprisingly easy, as they both concealed their respective secrets. Patrick wondered if it was as easy for Glenda to hide her intentions as it was for him with his plans. With everything in place, it was easy for him to move forward, though he wondered if he would ever regain a sense of normalcy. Before diving into the second volume, he checked his arrangements for Friday, which included additional tasks such as a visit to the bank to sort out his finances. He had already resigned from Anderson Electric, awaiting his final paycheck. It was past 1 a.m. when he finished the second volume, taking longer than expected as thoughts of Glenda and Anthony persisted. Fatigue weighed heavily on him, leading him to rest on the couch. Surprisingly, he fell asleep and woke at 7 a.m. Feeling refreshed after a quick breakfast, he resumed reading, starting the third volume from the beginning. By noon, he had finished the third and fourth volumes, setting the diaries aside to tackle his to-do list. His first stop was Anderson Electric to collect his final paycheck and clear out his locker. The owner, Gus Anderson, tried to convince him to stay, but understanding Patrick's situation, he said goodbye, hoping Patrick might return someday. At the bank, the paperwork delayed him, but he eventually left with a bag containing over $20,000 withdrawn from joint and personal accounts. Although he had expected more, he could only access immediate funds without Glenda's signature. Arriving home around 4 p.m., he checked his answering machine and found a message from Parole Investigations. Collecting himself, he called John Parole's direct line. "This is John Parole. How can I assist you?" "Hello, it's Patrick. Were you able to install the cameras, and did you find anything?" "Yes, Mr. Dunn. We installed cameras in both rooms yesterday afternoon and obtained results today. Both rooms were vacant during the operation, so it was quick." Patrick paused before asking, "Did anything significant appear in the footage?" He waited anxiously for John Parole's response. "Well, Patrick, it's hard to say, but your suspicions are validated. They spent the night together in your wife's room and engaged in intimate activities several times. I've transferred the video to DVD. If you still want it, I can send you 3 still frames as you requested." John's words brought tears to Patrick's eyes, making it all feel real. "Yes, please send the photos." "Thank you, Mr. Parole. If everything is settled financially, I consider our business concluded." "Yes, your payment covers the account in full. Are you feeling all right? You sound different today." "Situations like this usually bring emotional pain, and I'm concerned." "I'm fine, thank you. I'll reach out if I need anything else," Patrick responded, controlling his emotions but with an evident tone of worry. "Your lawyer might need a copy of the DVD unless you're seeking grounds for divorce beyond infidelity. We'll keep it for a year or until we receive further instructions. Many clients find therapy beneficial in such circumstances. Although it's not my area of expertise, a supportive therapist can make a significant difference," John suggested. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Parole. I have a plan to deal with this." "I appreciate your professionalism," Patrick said, ending the call before continuing any further discussion. With a stoic expression, he remained seated at the kitchen table until the sound of an incoming email caught his attention. Quietly, he entered the room with the computer and accessed the email from Peru Investigations, reviewing each of the 3 attached photos. He quickly sent them to the printer loaded with 8 by 10 photo paper. In a few moments, the tangible evidence of his wife's affair materialized in his hands. None of the photos showed explicit acts, but one, showing both of them lying together under a sheet, bothered him the most. It marked an emotional turning point for Patrick. After one last review of the photos, Patrick placed them in a brown envelope waiting on the kitchen table. Returning to his chair, he resumed reading the 5th journal. Just before midnight, he finished the last 2 volumes of Glenda's diaries, reflecting on their contents. Patrick realized how closely Glenda had adhered to his perceptions of her. Although there were few surprises, the diaries revealed numerous insights into her past, shedding light on previously unexplored aspects of their relationship. He discovered that Glenda struggled with insecurity more than he had previously thought, as evidenced in her diary entries. However, her deep love for him puzzled Patrick, making her actions with Anthony even more inexplicable. One revelation was that their initial meeting at a birthday party was not a coincidence. Glenda had orchestrated the encounter, expressing excitement at the prospect of reconnecting with him. Absorbed in reading the 2 volumes, Patrick later realized Glenda hadn't called, and he felt hungry. As he prepared a sandwich and a drink, thoughts about Glenda and Anthony's interactions consumed him. These thoughts, combined with his decision, fueled his restlessness that night. Whether it was the food or the vivid images of Glenda and Anthony that persisted in his mind, every time he closed his eyes, he struggled to rest. At 7 a.m., Patrick gave up on trying to sleep and got up to begin his meticulously planned day. With a full agenda ahead, he opted for an early start. At 8:30 a.m., he called his closest surviving relative, his brother Samuel. Although they weren't estranged, their interactions were infrequent, generally limited to obligatory holiday gatherings. Barely 2 weeks earlier, Samuel, his wife Mary, and their children, Sammy and Brenda, had visited. Patrick sensed Samuel's surprise at his unexpected morning visit, but he found his brother and family available, staying until shortly after 10 a.m. Patrick finally arrived at his brother's house, aware of the children's eagerness to resume their tasks. He gathered them in the kitchen while Mary brewed fresh coffee. Patrick and Samuel sat at the table, reminiscing about their recent Christmas gathering. Patrick recalled the family's upcoming trip to Disneyland during spring break. Delighted by the surprise, he gifted each child a $100 bill, provoking expressions of gratitude and warm hugs. "You didn't have to do that, Patrick," Samuel commented, "but it was kind of you. Seeing them so happy, how have you been? Did you win the lottery?" Patrick offered a weak smile. "No, I wasn't that lucky. My fortune isn't something I can brag about. I just felt like being generous." They sat together at the kitchen table with coffee, engaging in casual conversation. Mary chimed in, "I suppose I can stop beating around the bush about your big plans with Glenda. She mentioned your desire to start a family. I know she'll embrace parenthood as much as we have." Patrick paused before responding, "She shared that with you? Women don't seem to keep many secrets." Before Mary could continue, Patrick redirected the conversation, asking his brother about his job as a restaurant manager. After finishing their cups of coffee, Patrick stood up to leave. "Just in case I don't see you until next Christmas, take care," he said, quickly shaking his brother's hand and giving Mary a brief hug. "I'll keep you in my thoughts." With those words, he walked away, exchanging farewells as he reached his car. Watching Patrick leave, Samuel turned to Mary. "I wonder what he has in mind." "He seemed worried but not willing to talk," Samuel commented. Mary shrugged, seemingly unconcerned. "He's probably just passing the time until Glenda returns from her course. She mentioned she'd be back tonight." Hand in hand, they walked back into the house, discussing their plans for the rest of the day. A little before 6 p.m., Glenda arrived home, noticing Patrick's absence as she entered through the kitchen. She had rehearsed their reunion but felt disoriented by his absence. However, she saw it as an opportunity to unpack and do laundry. Contemplating another shower, she passed by the kitchen table and saw a note pinned down by a salt shaker, signed by Patrick, explaining his sudden absence due to work. Though slightly disappointed, the note allowed her to follow through with her plans. She then went upstairs, opting for a relaxing bath instead of a shower. As she gathered her clothes, she saw her diary on the dresser and remembered leaving it in her emergency bag. Relieved to find it intact, she retrieved it. She had originally planned to update it during her trip but forgot until Patrick reminded her of its location. Finding it where she left it, she decided to update it while doing laundry. While her clothes washed, she prepared a quick meal and tried calling Patrick, only to realize her phone was in the wicker basket. Frustrated at the lack of response, she returned to the table, unlocked her diary with a key from her wallet, and began writing on the first blank page. January 7th. The last 4 days of my life have just concluded, and I need to document everything, even if it's unpleasant. When I picked up Anthony, he seemed anxious during the trip. He made advances that bothered me, but he stopped after I warned him about being seen as we drove away. I didn't want to dwell on my time at the Sheraton. I can't erase the memories, but I'll try to move forward. Wednesday night, Anthony came to my room, and we quickly got involved in bed. After that, I understood the big difference between physical desire and genuine love. I ended things with Anthony, but he didn't take it well. Despite my attempts to avoid conflict, he became angry. We agreed to sleep on the matter, but I had already started planning how to make peace with Patrick. Friday morning, Anthony ignored my rejection and persisted. I shut the connecting door between our rooms, but he made plans with someone else that night. Seeing him with another woman made me realize he preys on vulnerable women like me. It was a relief not to argue with him, but I felt ashamed for falling into his trap. I dreaded the return trip with Anthony, but surprisingly, it went smoothly. Seeing him for who he truly was gave me control over our interaction. He behaved decently and accepted my decision to end things. While driving, I resolved to seek therapy to understand and overcome my vulnerability toward him. I am determined never to betray Patrick again. I've also decided to stop taking birth control and embrace the possibility of having children. After finishing her long diary entry, Glenda used the pen as a bookmark, left the book on the table, and went upstairs to prepare a bath, taking the cordless phone with her in case Patrick called. She filled the tub to the right level and added bath oil, then lit some candles before sinking into the warm water to relax. She closed her eyes, almost drifting off, but felt as though she was being watched. Glancing cautiously around, she saw no one in the bedroom and settled back into the water. As she relaxed again, she pondered how to make amends with Patrick after her misguided involvement with Anthony. An hour later, feeling rejuvenated, Glenda returned to the kitchen. After transferring the laundry to the dryer, she went back to the table to review her diary entry. Momentarily confused by the absence of the pen from the book, she remembered leaving it there but then saw it on the kitchen table near the wicker basket. On Sunday morning, Glenda woke up feeling refreshed and eager to start a new chapter in her life. After spending the morning cleaning, she showered and put on an outfit she knew Patrick admired. By mid-afternoon, she was sitting at the kitchen table, enjoying a cup of coffee while a large roast cooked in the oven. Her tranquility was interrupted by a knock at the side door. Her surprise turned to alarm when she saw two burly men outside, one, a young uniformed police officer with his hand resting on his holstered gun, and the other, slightly older, dressed in a suit and coat, holding a police badge. "I'm Detective Rankin, and this is Officer Reynolds from the Springfield Police Department. We're looking for Patrick Dunn. Is he home?" Glenda's face relaxed with relief as she assured them, "Patrick is at work right now. I was worried when I saw you. I'm his wife, by the way. Maybe I can help," she added quickly. After a brief exchange of glances, Detective Rankin suggested, "Perhaps we should come inside. It's a bit cold out here." Glenda invited them in, stepping back to allow their entry. "Of course, come in," she said, leading them to the kitchen. "Why are you looking for Patrick?" she inquired, a hint of concern returning to her expression. "He's not in any trouble, is he?" she added anxiously. Detective Rankin quickly reassured her, "No, it's nothing like that. As far as we know, your husband is perfectly fine. We just need to speak with him about a case we're working on." "Are you sure your husband is at work?" "Of course," she said, moving to the counter to retrieve the note Patrick had left. She handed it to the detective. "You can read his message for yourself. It was there when I got back from my trip last night." Officer Reynolds stood by the counter, watching the back entrance to the kitchen, his hand still resting on his weapon. After reading the note, the detective handed it back. "May I keep this, Mrs. Dunn?" Glenda shook her head, and the detective placed the note in his briefcase. Glenda's curiosity got the better of her, and she nervously asked, "Why do you need to talk to Patrick? What interest could the police have in him? He's never been in trouble." The detective responded, "This morning, we received a homicide call. The call was traced to your husband's cell phone. We're working with his provider to determine his location at that time." Glenda was flooded with relief. "There must be some mistake. I tried calling my husband last night when I got home, but I found his cell phone here." She pointed to a wicker basket on the kitchen table. The detective looked skeptical. "May I check the phone?" He walked to the basket, examined it briefly, then picked it up and placed it back on the table. "I don't see any cell phone here, Mrs. Dunn. Are you sure you're not mistaken about the timing? Perhaps it wasn't yesterday?" Glenda's expression of surprise confirmed that the basket was indeed empty. Despite her obvious confusion, she searched around the counter in disbelief. "I don't understand. His phone was here when I tried calling him last night," she explained, frustration and worry evident as she glanced between the officer and the detective. "Well, I can't explain why the phone isn't where you say it should be, Mrs. Dunn. It seems the call traced to your husband's phone was indeed made from it," the detective said, making a note in his folder. "Do you know Anthony Romano?" Glenda was startled at the mention of the name, her face briefly paling. "I know Anthony Romano, but my husband doesn't. Anthony was my assistant last semester," she clarified. After a quick exchange of glances, the detective continued, "So, your husband had no reason to dislike Mr. Romano? Are you absolutely sure he didn't know him?" Glenda's panic grew as she answered, "No, he never met Anthony." The detective took a few more notes before looking up again. "It seems your husband knew Mr. Romano well enough to make the call reporting that he had been eliminated." Glenda, shocked, sat down and exclaimed, "Anthony is dead. I dropped him off at his house yesterday around 5:30. How could he be dead?" Detective Rankin took a seat across from her and asked, "What was your relationship with Mr. Romano? Could there have been a motive for your husband's involvement?" Glenda's face paled as the detective spoke. After a moment, she regained her composure and stated, "Anthony was just a high school student. Neither my assistant nor my husband would have had any reason to harm him." Despite her words, her tone lacked conviction. The detective let the silence linger for nearly half a minute before speaking again. "When we arrived at the address provided by your husband, we found evidence of an attack on Mr. Romano as he entered his house. A travel bag was in the hallway, along with footprints indicating a struggle. It appears Mr. Romano lost the fight and was dragged into the kitchen, where he was tied to a chair with nylon straps commonly used for electrical cables." As the detective described the scene in Anthony's house, Glenda began to cry softly. Mr. Romano was shot in the leg before being dragged into the kitchen. The coroner suspects a major artery was hit, given the significant blood loss. The results of the autopsy are pending, but it appears Mr. Romano suffered multiple blows before succumbing to a single gunshot to the head, the detective continued. Preliminary ballistics suggest that the weapon used was a .25 caliber semi-automatic pistol registered in your husband's name. The detective consulted his notes before continuing. Forensics preliminarily suggest he was shot in the groin post-mortem, a non-lethal wound. The estimated time of death is between 6 and 8 p.m. yesterday. At this point, Glenda interrupted, stating, "Patrick could never commit such an act, that's not the kind of person he is." Her tears had lessened, replaced by obvious anger. The detective glanced at his notes before proceeding. "According to state records, your husband owns a permit for a .25 caliber semi-automatic pistol. One of the bullets recovered from the chair matches this caliber, tentatively linking it to his weapon. The motive remains unclear." Detective Rankin opened his folder and eventually produced 3 photocopies, placing them on the table in front of Glenda. These are copies of 3 photos found at the crime scene. Their positioning near Mr. Romano suggests they were shown to him before his death. The blood spatter indicates someone was present during the fatal shot. "I don't believe you've been entirely truthful about your connection with Anthony Romano or your husband's involvement with him." Glenda took the photocopies, her expression shifting to one of shock as she examined them. As the realization sank in, she began crying uncontrollably, insisting, "No, Patrick couldn't have known." Just as the detective was about to elaborate on more details of the crime scene, his cell phone rang. During the 3-minute call, he mostly remained silent, jotting down notes in his notebook. Meanwhile, Glenda's crying subsided, leaving her sitting quietly with her hands covering her face, tears running down her cheeks. After finishing his notes, the detective looked at Glenda and revealed, "The call from your husband was traced to Windsor, Ontario. Local authorities collaborated with the phone provider to locate his device, which was found in a bag containing credit cards and a .25 caliber semi-automatic pistol registered in his name. The bag was discovered in a trash bin in the Walmart parking lot. Neither he nor his vehicle were spotted, although license plates matching his car were found in the trash. They suspect he may have changed the plates to blend in with Ontario traffic." This news did not console Glenda, who remained seated at her desk, crying inconsolably. After observing her for a few minutes, the detective pulled out another photocopy from his folder and presented it to her. It showed a small brass key next to a ruler. There was a key in the photos, its significance is unclear. "Do you recognize it?" Glenda examined the image and quickly retrieved her purse. Within moments, she produced a matching key from her wallet, holding it up next to the photo. At that moment, she lost control, collapsing into her chair. Her only words were, "Diary," and "Patrick." The 2 men stayed with her for almost 15 minutes, waiting for her to regain her composure. Eventually, they persuaded her to call someone for support. After ensuring that her brother would arrive shortly, they left. As they walked to their cars, Officer Reynolds asked, "Do you think they'll catch him soon?" "It depends on how well he can evade capture. He hasn't committed any crimes in Canada in the past 2 weeks, so their police might not prioritize his search. He's not a serial killer. If he avoids detection, his chances of being caught decrease over time. If he remains free for 6 months, we might consider seeking publicity through TV shows like Most Wanted, as they've had success in similar cases," the detective explained. Officer Reynolds paused to consider the response before asking another question, "What do you think about her story regarding the cell phone? She seemed genuine when she said it was their last night." "Yes, I agree. I don't think she was lying or mistaken. My hunch is that Patrick came back but didn't follow through with his plan while he was here. He probably saw his phone and decided to take it with him," said Detective Rankin. The officer looked puzzled. "But if he was here, why didn't he say anything to her? It's strange that he would come back just for the phone." Detective Rankin stopped, fixing the young officer with a stare. "Think about it. Patrick Dunn just eliminated his lover and is coming home. The only reason he would return, in my opinion, would be to kill her, and maybe himself. I don't know what changed his mind, but I doubt he came back just for the phone." Reynolds nodded thoughtfully, digesting the detective's words. He eventually commented, "I think Mrs. Dunn will eventually realize how close she came to losing her life, and she'll wonder why it didn't happen. I wonder how she'll feel about that."